The town of Millhaven, Alberta, had made up its mind about Bridget Callum before she turned 19. Small towns have a particular talent for that, deciding who a person is and then holding to that decision with the stubbornness of frost in the ground long after the season has shifted. Bridget was 31 years old when this story properly begins, though the town's opinion of her had been settled for more than a decade. She ran the Callum Grain and Feed on the east end of Main Street, the same building her father had run before the stroke took the steadiness from his hands and the numbers from his head. She had taken over quietly, without ceremony, because that was the kind of woman she was. Not the kind who made announcements, but the kind who simply began doing what needed to be done. She was tall. That fact registered first with most people who met her. 5 feet 11 3/4, which she had learned to say as 5'11" because the extra 3/4 seemed to bother people more than the height itself. She had her mother's dark auburn hair, worn in a braid most days because a braid didn't require decisions, and she had her father's gray eyes, which were the color of the sky over the Alberta foothills in November and which had the same quality of that sky, open and quiet and capable of weather. She was good at her work, exceptionally good. She had taught herself the grain commodity markets from a manual she'd ordered from a university press in Edmonton, and she read the Prairie Grain Advance each week with the focused attention of someone who understood that information was the difference between a farm surviving a bad year and not surviving it. Her customers trusted her not because she was pleasant, though she was, but because she was accurate. She did not guess. She knew, or she told you plainly that she didn't and then found out. Millhaven had formed its conclusion about Bridget Callum through the accumulated weight of 100 small observations, that she had turned down 2 men who had, by the town's accounting, represented reasonable prospects, that she seemed to prefer the company of the grain reports to most of the company on offer, that she had opinions about federal agricultural policy and stated them clearly when asked and occasionally when not asked, that she had, at the age of 24, fired an employee twice her age for chronic dishonesty, quietly and without drama, and had been right to do it, which somehow made it worse. The conclusion was delivered the way Millhaven delivered all its conclusions, not in any single statement, but in the slow accumulation of comments at the co-op, at Sunday services, at the Thursday morning coffee at the bakery on 2nd Street. She was too capable, people said in the particular tone that made capability sound like a deficiency. She was too independent. She didn't need anyone, and men, generally speaking, wanted to be needed. Bridget had her own opinion about this, which she kept mostly to herself. Her opinion was that the men she had encountered had not been interested in her as she actually was. They had been interested in a version of her that was smaller and quieter and required more from them, and that version didn't exist and she saw no reason to perform it. She was also honest enough with herself in the evenings when the store was closed and the accounts were finished and the Alberta dark came down early and complete around the building, to acknowledge that she was not entirely satisfied with the way things were. There was something she hadn't found. She knew its general shape. She had stopped expecting to find it in Millhaven, which had shown her, she thought, most of what it had. She was mistaken about that. He came on a Tuesday in early April, when the frost was still in the ground and the fields around Millhaven were the gray-brown of waiting. His name was Fletcher Howe, and he had come to Millhaven because the Abernethy operation, 12,000 acres of grain and canola running north of town, had hired him as their new operations manager. He was 38, and he had spent 15 years working agricultural operations across 3 provinces, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and a year in British Columbia that he didn't count because it had been mostly tree fruit, and he was a grain man at heart. He came to the Callum Grain and Feed on his first morning in town, because that was where a new operations manager went first. Establish the supplier relationship. Understand the pricing. Know who you're dealing with before you need something in a hurry. He pushed through the door at 8:15. Bridget was at the counter going through the morning invoices, and she looked up when the door opened with the assessing attention of someone who has run a business long enough to read a customer's purpose within the first few seconds. She was taller than he'd expected. He registered that, and registered immediately that it was something other people probably made a point of, so he didn't. She had dark auburn hair pinned up in a braid and gray eyes that were direct and unhurried, and she was wearing a canvas apron over a dark green thermal and a pair of work pants that had seen real work, and she looked exactly like someone who ran a grain store and not as though she had recently remembered she was supposed to look like something else. "Morning," she said. "What can I help you with?" "Fletcher Howe," he said. "I'm the new operations manager at Abernethy's. I need to set up an account." "How?" she said. She pulled the account ledger from under the counter. "How do you spell it?" he told her. She wrote it without looking up. "Abernethy's previous manager left the account in good standing," she said. "I'll carry over the same terms. First of the month, net 30. "That works," he said. She went through the standard quantities with him. Winter wheat, canola, the supplementary feed for the Abernethy cattle operation on the South Quarter. She asked the right questions and did not ask the unnecessary ones, and she wrote everything down with the speed of someone who had been doing this for years. When they were done, she closed the ledger and looked at him. "You're from skepticism." It wasn't quite a question. Originally, spent the last 6 years in Manitoba. Long way to come for Abernethy's. "I looked at 4 positions before I took this one," he said. Something about this part of Alberta felt right. She looked at him for a moment. "The land or the operation?" "The land to start," he said. "I haven't been here long enough to know about the operation." She almost smiled. "Come back once you've been here a week," she said. "You'll have a better sense." He went back to Abernethy's. He thought about the conversation the whole drive out. He came back Thursday, not for supplies. The account was set up. The first order wasn't due until the following week. He came back because he was in town for a part from the equipment dealer, and the feed store was 2 doors down, and those were the reasons he gave himself, which were true as far as they went. Bridget was behind the counter doing the commodity summary. She looked up when he came in. "Mr. Howe," she said. "I don't actually need anything," he said. "I was at Hanson's Equipment and I thought—" He stopped. She waited. "I thought you might be willing to give me the honest version of Millhaven," he said. "I'm new. There are things I'd rather know early than late." She leaned back against the shelf behind her and considered him with the expression of someone who is evaluating a stated reason and has formed a view about its completeness. "The honest version," she said. "Where to eat, who to trust, what to avoid." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Helene's on the north end of Maine does the only breakfast worth having. The accountant on 3rd Street is competent. The one on 5th is not. He's been doing Abernethy's books for 8 years and has consistently missed their equipment depreciation, which is why their margins look worse than they are. The co-op manager is honest but slow to act, which is a kind of dishonesty in its own way. The RCMP detachment is well run." She paused. "Anything else?" "Who should I be careful of?" he said. "Anyone who tells you Millhaven is a straightforward town," she said. "It isn't. No town is, but this one is particularly confident about its own judgments." He looked at her. "What about you?" She looked back at him, and there was a slight pause, a brief widening of the eyes before she settled again. "Most of Millhaven would tell you to be careful of me," she said. "I'm told I'm too much." "Too much what?" he said. "That part varies by who you ask," she said. "Too capable, mostly. Too certain about things. Too tall, if you ask some people, which I find the least interesting criticism." He looked at her without any particular expression. "That sounds like a description of someone who actually knows what they're doing," he said. "I've been hiring and managing people for 15 years. That profile doesn't sound like a warning. It sounds like a résumé." The quiet between them was different after that. He bought 2 small items he didn't need, said good morning, and left. Bridget stood at the counter for a moment after the door closed. Then she went back to the commodity summary, but she did it more slowly than usual. Millhaven noticed, because Millhaven always noticed. By the second week, it was established knowledge at Thursday morning coffee that Fletcher Howe had been to the Callum feed store twice in 4 days, which was once more than grain business required. By the third week, it was known that they had spoken on the store's front steps on a Tuesday evening, visible from the street, for 40 minutes after closing. By the end of the month, Millhaven had settled into the collective view that the new Abernethy operations managers either hadn't been told about Bridget Callum or hadn't understood the relevant implications. Several people felt moved to address this. It was Don Abernethy himself, which was notable, because Don Abernethy was not a man who involved himself in things that weren't his direct concern. Who raised it? He mentioned it on a Friday afternoon when Fletcher was reviewing the spring seeding inputs, and he raised it with the careful indirection of a man who thought he was being subtle. "Good woman, Bridget Callum," Don said. "Runs an honest operation. Her father built that store up over 30 years. "I know," Fletcher said without looking up from the inputs. "She's the best grain supplier I've worked with in 3 provinces. Her market timing is excellent." Don cleared his throat. "She's a particular kind of woman, though. Independent, has strong views. The fellows who've been interested in her before have generally found it." He paused, looking for the word. "Found it what?" Fletcher said. He looked up now. His expression was polite and direct. Don seemed to reconsider his approach. "People have found her a lot to take on," he said. "That's all I'm saying." Fletcher was quiet for a moment. Then, "I spent 6 years managing a 400,000-acre operation in the Interlake with a team of 32 people across 2 languages in 3 different crop systems," he said, returning to the inputs. "I think I can manage a conversation with a woman who has opinions about grain prices." Don opened his mouth and then closed it. Fletcher went back to the numbers. It was a Wednesday evening in May when something shifted. The Alberta spring had arrived, cautious and green, the fields around Millhaven finally showing the first real color. Fletcher had come to the store near closing time with no particular excuse prepared, which was its own kind of statement. Bridget was locking the side door when he pulled up, and she turned and looked at him and waited. "I don't have a reason," he said, getting out of the truck. "I know," she said. "I thought, if you were finished for the day, we could walk," he said. "There's a trail along the creek south of town. I found it last week." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took off her work apron, folded it over the door handle, and said, "Give me a minute." They walked along the creek in the early evening, the cottonwoods coming into leaf, the water running full and fast with snowmelt. The Alberta sky was doing what it does in May, staying light far longer than you expect, the horizon going shades of amber and rose that feel almost unreasonable. They talked, not carefully, not in the managed way of 2 people monitoring the impression they were making, the other kind. Bridget told him about her father's stroke and the 6 weeks she had spent learning the accounts while simultaneously running the floor alone, and what it had felt like to understand, at 26, that the business would either survive, because she made it survive, or it would not survive. He told her about Manitoba and the year the flax markets collapsed, and what 15-hour days for 4 months straight did to a person, and why he had eventually decided that a different kind of life was worth looking for, even if that meant starting over somewhere new. "Why Millhaven specifically?" she said. "I looked at operations in 3 other locations," he said. "Bigger operations than Abernethy's. Better money in 2 cases. But," he was quiet for a moment. The creek ran past them, and the light was going slowly gold. "There was something about this part of the province," he said. "I drove through in February, just scouting. It was -22 and there was nothing to see." He paused. "I don't know. Something about it felt like a place worth staying in." She looked at him sideways. "You decided based on a February scouting trip. I've made bigger decisions on less," he said. They walked for a while in the comfortable silence of 2 people who have each discovered, with some surprise, that the other person's quiet is not uncomfortable. Then Bridget said, with the directness that was simply how she was built, "People have been telling you things about me." "Yes," he said. "What things?" "That you're too much," he said. "For most men. That you're too settled in your ways, that the feed store is your whole world, and there's no room in it for anything else." She looked at the water. And I've spent a month talking to you," he said, "and buying things I don't actually need to have an excuse to do it. And I think the people who said that have been measuring you against men who didn't want a partner, they wanted someone to stand slightly behind them and agree. That's not too much. That's just not what you are." She was quiet for a long moment. "You don't know me that well yet," she said. "No," he said. "But I know you taught yourself commodity trading from a university textbook because there was no one in Millhaven who could teach you, and you got it right. I know you fired someone twice your age when you were 24 because he was lying to your customers, and you were correct to do it. I know you give farmers pricing advice that sometimes costs in the short term because it's the honest advice." He paused. "I know when you laugh, it's because something is actually funny." She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him in the long Alberta evening light, the cottonwoods moving lightly around them, the creek steady beside them. She looked at Fletcher Howe with the full attention of someone who has been seen accurately and is taking a moment to understand what that means. "Fletcher," she said. "Yes," he said. "What exactly is it you're doing here?" she said. "I'm telling you," he said, "that I think Millhaven has had it wrong about you for a long time, and I'd like the chance to be one of the people who has it right." He paused. "If you're interested." She held his gaze. The light moved over the water. A pair of Canada geese went over low and deliberate, heading north. "All right," she said, "just that." But it was enough. June came to Millhaven with the particular quality that June brings to southern Alberta. Warm days that smell like growth and evenings that cool, fast and sharp and make a person glad of company. Fletcher and Bridget found their rhythm in each other across that month. They ate Tuesday dinners at Helene's, where the food was good and the corner booth was private enough to talk without the whole restaurant listening, which they both preferred. They drove the back roads on Saturday mornings when the Abernethy operation could spare him, and the store was quiet, and Bridget showed him the country the way you can only show it to someone who actually looks. She had grown up here. She knew where the sloughs were that held the ducks longest in fall migration, and which fields had the richest black soil underneath the surface, and where the old Blackfoot Trail ran across the ridge north of town, mostly invisible now, but findable if you knew what to look for. She showed him these things not as a performance of local knowledge, but because they mattered to her, and she had reached the age of 31 without finding someone who wanted to know them alongside her. Millhaven was watching all of this, because Millhaven watched everything. The Thursday morning coffee had cycled through several positions on the matter. There had been the initial surprise, then the waiting to see, then the slow, reluctant admission that Fletcher Howe didn't seem to be going anywhere. It was Elsa McIntyre, who ran the bakery and who had known Bridget's mother before she passed, who said what several people were thinking. She said it to Don Abernethy's wife, Patricia, at the July long weekend farmers market, with genuine feeling. "I always thought she just needed the right person," Elsa said. "Someone who wasn't put off by her." "Put off," Patricia said. "I always thought she was remarkable." Elsa looked at her. "You never said." "Nobody asked me," Patricia said, which was true. It was the last week of July when it came to a head, in the way that things that have been building quietly for months come to a head, not dramatically, but decisively. Fletcher had been asked by an operation in Saskatchewan, a larger position than Abernethy's, to come for an interview. He told Bridget about it at Tuesday dinner at Helene's. He told her plainly because he didn't see the point of anything else. "They reached out 6 weeks ago," he said. "I didn't respond for a month. I've told them I'm not interested." "Why?" she said. "Because I've been interested in staying here," he said, "for reasons that should be clear." She looked at him across the table. "That's a significant decision." "I've made significant decisions before," he said. "This one was easier than most." She was quiet for a moment. "You turned down a larger position." "Yes, without discussing it with me." "It wasn't a discussion I needed to have before I knew my own answer," he said. "If you'd told me to go, I would have had the discussion with you then." Something moved across her face that she didn't try to prevent. "Fletcher," she said. "Yes. I've been offered things before," she said carefully, "and they've all been smaller than they seemed at first. I'm not saying that about you. I'm saying that's what I've learned to expect." "I know," he said. "The two proposals you turned down are a matter of town record. So is why you turned them down. I'm not Grover Henwick, who wanted someone to help pull inventory, and I'm not whatever his name was from out of province who told you that you must be lonely." He paused. "I'm a person who drove past Millhaven in February, in -22, and felt something click into place, and then I came here and found out why." He looked at her directly. "I think you already know what I'm saying." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not going to become a different kind of person," she said. "I'll still have the store. I'll still read the grain reports. I'll still have opinions about the federal input subsidy structure that I'll state when I think they're relevant." "Good," he said. "I'd find the alternative considerably less interesting." The corner booth at Helene's was not a particularly romantic setting. It smelled of coffee and the soup of the day, and the fluorescent light over the counter was flickering in a way it had been flickering for 3 weeks. Bridget Callum looked at Fletcher Howe across a Tuesday dinner table in an unremarkable restaurant in a small Alberta town and felt the thing she had known the shape of without knowing its name. "All right," she said. "There is a moment in every good story where the thing that has been building for a long time arrives, simply and without overstatement, and you recognize it not because it is loud, but because it is exactly right. That was the moment. You'd have recognized it too if you'd been sitting in the booth across the room. August came, then September. Fletcher's position at Abernethy's was going well. Better than well. The grain brokerage margins were up 11% over the previous year, and Don Abernethy had the slightly surprised expression of a man who had hired a person expecting competence and received something considerably beyond it. Bridget ran the Callum grain and feed and the Callum accounts and, increasingly, offered informal commodity strategy to 3 of the larger operations north of town, because she was good at it and word had gotten around. She kept the Callum name on the store sign. Her father sat most mornings in the chair by the front window of the store, watching the street, and if he took particular pleasure in watching his daughter work, he was not a man who made speeches about it. But his expression said what words would have been insufficient to carry. They were married in October, when the fields were in harvest and Millhaven was at its particular best. All motion and purpose combines running through the golden afternoons, the air smelling of cut canola and the approaching cold. The ceremony was at the Anglican Church on 3rd Street, and it was exactly as simple as Bridget wanted, and exactly as unhurried as Fletcher preferred. And the combination produced the kind of wedding where the important thing happened, and the things that were not important were absent. Millhaven came. Millhaven comes to everything, but this had a particular quality of interest. The town turning out for the wedding of a woman it had written off, and a man who had arrived in February, in -22, apparently already decided. Elsa McIntyre made the cake. Don Abernethy said afterward that he'd seen Fletcher for what he was within the first week, which was not entirely accurate, but he said it with genuine warmth. Patricia Abernethy did not revise her original view, which had been correct. The 2 men who had once proposed to Bridget were not present, being in other places, which was appropriate. Her father sat in the front row and did not try to hold anything back when the moment came. Afterward, Millhaven revised its opinion about Bridget Callum in the way that small towns revise opinions, not with any acknowledgement that a revision was occurring, but through the slow replacement of one set of comments with another. She had always been exceptional, people said. She had always been exactly the kind of woman who needed exactly that kind of man. The tattoo facts had simply required time to find each other, which was almost right. The truth was simpler. She had not needed a particular kind of man. She had needed a person who looked at her actual self, the full height, and the grain reports, and the strong views, and the real laugh, and found all of it, every part of it, precisely enough. Not too much, not a problem to be accommodated, enough. The town of Millhaven had called her too much for 31 years. It had simply taken one man, driving through in February in -22, to see what had been true the whole time.